Emma Caldwell stumbled through the snow, knowing one more closed door might be her last. Her breath came in short, raspy bursts, each exhale curling into the air like the last thread of her resolve. Wind cut through the seams of her torn shawl, pushing her sideways with every gust. But she kept walking. She had nothing left but her legs, and even those threatened to give out with every step. She had knocked on 12 doors. 12. Some cursed her, some turned their faces. Most simply closed the door without a word. Her hands, red and raw, trembled as she reached the 13th. This cabin looked no warmer than the rest, its fence half buried in snow, chimney barely smoking. But it stood, and she stood before it, and that was enough. Emma didn't knock hard. She couldn't. Her knuckles had cracked, and dried blood lined the folds of her fingers. She tapped twice, then again. For a long moment, there was only wind and the ache of waiting. Then a latch slid back, slow, almost reluctant. The man who opened the door looked carved from the same stone as the mountains behind him. Tall, broad-shouldered, snow-dusting his coat and beard. His eyes didn't narrow in suspicion or widen in curiosity. He simply looked at her. Face. Feet. Face again. Emma tried to speak. Her throat burned. "Please," she rasped. It was all she had. The man didn't answer. He didn't ask. He stepped aside. Inside, warmth didn't rush to greet her. It hovered quietly, like the man himself. The hearth crackled low in the far wall. A stew pot hung over embers, scent faint but real. Emma's knees buckled. She caught the frame, barely. He didn't move to help, but he didn't close the door. Instead, he limped across the room and retrieved a folded blanket from a crate. He placed it on a chair near the door and returned to his seat by the fire. Emma didn't speak. She didn't need to. She moved to the chair, wrapped the wool around her shoulders, and knelt beside the fire. Her body trembled uncontrollably, not from fear but from the shock of no longer being alone. The cabin was plain. Logs and stone. One bed behind a curtain. 2 chairs. Hooks on the wall held a coat, a rifle, a ladle. No photographs. No names. She didn't know who he was, why he let her in. But he had, and for now, that was enough. She didn't know why he let her in, but she was inside and still breathing. Emma stared into the fire, unsure if the silence meant safety or something else. The room was warm enough to keep the frostbite at bay, but not enough to erase the sting in her hands and feet. She sat close to the hearth, knees drawn, under the scratchy wool blanket he'd given her. The man had returned to his chair and hadn't spoken a word since. He hadn't asked her name, hadn't asked why she looked like she'd crawled through barbed wire, hadn't asked what she'd done to get turned away 12 times before his. She didn't know what to make of that. The flames popped softly, their light dancing on the stone hearth and across his weathered boots. He sat forward, elbows resting on his thighs, hands clasped loosely between them. His eyes, dark and unreadable, never left the fire. He seemed like a man carved into stillness. Emma's voice cracked from disuse. "Thank you." He didn't reply. The silence was heavy but not hostile. Not like the door slam she'd heard all week. Not like the preacher's silence when he'd let her fall from grace without lifting a word in her defense. She glanced around. There were no photographs, no woman's touch. A curtain hung loosely where a bedroom might be, but even that felt unused. The air smelled like stew and smoke and a kind of loneliness that had settled deep. Emma shifted, and the blanket slipped from one shoulder. She caught him glance once, then look away, not like a man shaming her, but like one trying to remember what it meant to look. "I'm not here to steal or beg pity," she said softly. Still nothing. She hesitated, then added, "Just needed warmth. I'll be gone when the storm lets up." His hand flexed slightly on his knee. A small motion, but the first she noticed. "I didn't ask," he finally said. His voice was rough like it hadn't been used in days. Emma blinked at him. He didn't meet her eyes. He didn't need to. Those 3 words were enough. She looked back at the flames. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, but her stomach had stopped growling. She hadn't slept in a bed in longer than that, but the floor under her bones didn't matter. She was dry. She was warm, and she was still here. Maybe silence wasn't cold. Maybe it was cautious kindness. And maybe, just maybe, that was what she needed most. "I'll leave tomorrow," she whispered, barely above the crackle of the fire. "Storm won't pass by," the man replied, his voice as dry and matter-of-fact as the timber he tossed into the hearth. Emma didn't argue. She'd felt it in her bones, that heavy stillness in the air that said the world outside wasn't done punishing yet. The window panes still shivered with every gust of wind. Snow pressed against the lower edges of the cabin walls like a siege. She stayed by the fire long after the man, whose name she still didn't know, had retired to the shadows behind the curtain. The wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders no longer shook from cold, but from something else, something she hadn't let herself feel in weeks. Safety. When the cabin darkened, save for the glow of embers, Emma laid herself down on the rug near the hearth, folded herself into the blanket, and let her eyes close. She half expected to be told to move, to be reminded she didn't belong. Morning came gray and still. The man was already up, placing kindling with a precision born of routine. He glanced once in her direction and gave a short nod acknowledging her presence without surprise or irritation. "I didn't mean to take up your whole floor," she said. "It's fine." That was all. But it carried more mercy than any sermon she'd heard. Later, as he moved toward the stove, she stood and crossed the room barefoot, blankets still tight around her frame. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked. "Cook? Sweep?" He stepped aside. "Pot's warm. Cornmeal and beans." She nodded, took up the ladle, and worked like she'd always belonged in that space. Not because she wanted approval, but because she needed to feel human again. When they sat to eat, it was silent. Spoons against tin, no conversation. But something in the tension between them had shifted. She could feel it in how he didn't flinch when she moved, in how he passed her water without being asked. "You live out here by yourself?" she asked. A nod. "Got family?" "Number." She looked at his hands, broad and battered, curled slightly around the edge of the table. "You were a soldier," she said. "That limp, that doesn't come from chopping wood." He looked at her fully for the first time in hours. "Union." Emma nodded once. "My husband was a preacher. Said I made men stare too much. So he left. Told folks I was a temptation." She didn't cry. She didn't beg sympathy. She simply stated it, then returned to her meal. "I ain't asking for pity," she added. "Just don't want you thinking I'm here to rob you." "I didn't ask," he said again. Simple as before. She smiled. Small, brief. "I'll leave when the storm breaks." He didn't respond. But when the firewood needed chopping that afternoon, he passed her the smaller axe. Didn't ask if she could swing it. Didn't try to correct her grip. He just let her try. And when she split her first log, uneven and jagged, he didn't laugh or comment. He just stacked it beside his own. Work didn't need orders anymore. It just happened like staying. Everyone stared when they rode into Cotton Ridge, Emma behind Sam, wrapped in his coat. The mule moved slow behind Sam's bay mare, hooves crunching over old ice and gravel. Emma kept her head down, but she felt the weight of every glance like stones tucked into her shawl. It was the first time she'd seen the town by daylight. The general store leaned like it was tired of standing. A rusted bell hung crooked above the saloon. Even the jail looked abandoned, though a boy swept snow from its steps with nervous eyes. Sam didn't look at anyone. He dismounted with practiced ease, tied off his reins, and waited for her. She slid off the mule, legs stiff from cold, and stayed close. They stepped into the feed store together, boots scuffing the dusty wooden floor. The warmth inside was thin, the kind that seeped in only because the wind couldn't follow. Shelves lined with sacks and tins. A thick man behind the counter nodded to Sam, then gave Emma a single glance, neutral, but cautious. Sam said little. "Need oats, salt, and..." The clerk gathered supplies. No fuss, no friendliness. Before they could leave, a voice cut through the still air behind them. "You pick her up off the road, Sam?" Emma turned slowly. A younger man leaned against a barrel near the back. Dusty coat, smug grin, the kind of man who always saw bruises as invitations. "Sure, don't look like your wife," he added, gaze crawling up her legs. Sam turned. Not fast, not loud, but the air changed. "Say that again," he said, voice calm. The man shrugged, still grinning, just wondering if she's your cook or your. He didn't finish. The clerk moved between them. That's enough, Cal. You want to keep your teeth? Cal lingered a moment, eyes flicking back to Emma. Then he left, door slamming harder than needed. Sam didn't speak. He handed over coin, picked up the feed sack, and led the mule outside. Emma followed, throat tight. Her shame wasn't fresh, it was well-worn, but it still stung. Halfway back up the trail toward the cabin, she spoke. You should have let him say it. Sam said nothing. They all think it, she continued, that I'm just here to warm your bed. He pulled the mule to a stop, turned in the saddle, and looked at her fully. I don't give a damn what they think. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Emma looked away, voice quieter now. I just didn't want you to be shamed for taking me in. End of 7. I took you in because you were cold and near dead, he said. You stayed because you work harder than most men I've known. That's not shame. She didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever spoken about her like that. Not without a catch. The town may whisper, but Sam's words spoke louder. That night, she didn't sleep on her side of the bed. Not because she wasn't given one. Sam hadn't said a word about where she should lie since the first week. He simply left the curtain open one night, didn't take the whole blanket the next, and slowly, without a map, they found their places near each other. The storm had broken, but Emma hadn't left. 3 mornings had passed since the wind died down. She'd still wake, check the light through the window, and wonder if today would be the day she walked away. But her boots stayed under the chair, and her hands stayed busy beside Sam's Timex. She poured him coffee that evening, handed it to him without comment. He took it with a nod. When she sat near the fire, he didn't return to his chair across the room. He stood for a moment, then sat beside her, closer than usual, not touching, just near. I can go, she said, after a stretch of quiet. He looked at her, not startled, just steady. Do you want to? He asked. Emma stared into the flames. I don't know. I thought I did, but I think I was just used to running. He nodded. Not like he agreed, but like he understood. She turned to face him fully. Do you want me to leave? His brow furrowed. Even if they talk, I don't care. That's not what I asked. He sighed through his nose, slow and deep. Number I don't want you to go. There it was. Simple, undressed, truthful. She moved first, barely. Her shoulder leaned into his, tentative but not uncertain. His arm shifted, then settled behind her, not pulling, just resting. Minutes passed. The fire cracked. The wind whispered against the roof. Inside, their breathing synced not by design, but by relief. Emma didn't cry. Sam didn't speak. They didn't name what was happening. They didn't need to. No one asked for more than was offered. No one pulled away either. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked, crouched near the fence with a coil of wire in her lap. Sam shook his head without looking up. Left too many already. And they were repairing the broken line along the edge of his small pasture. The frost had lifted just enough to make work bearable, and the snow had melted into soft mud that clung to boots and hems alike. Emma worked beside him in silence, hands red from cold and work. She didn't complain. She liked how effort settled between them, honest, unspoken. The fence didn't care about past sins. They fell into rhythm. Sam hammered posts. Emma strung wire. The cold nipped at their ears. But they moved like people who no longer feared being watched. Inside the cabin later, she washed her hands in a tin basin, wincing as the cracked skin met warm water. Sam came in with an armful of chopped wood and stopped when he saw her fingers shaking. He said nothing, but when he passed the table, he set down a small tin of salve, thick, homemade. She looked at it, then at him. You made this? She asked. Used to. He turned away, removing his coat. Still good. She dabbed it gently onto her hands that night by the fire. Sam didn't look, but she felt him glance over once or twice. She didn't hide the smile on her face. The next morning, she rose early and made cornbread from what little flour was left. The smell brought him in from the barn before she even finished setting the table. You don't have to work like this, he said, accepting a slice. She shrugged, but I want to. He nodded once. That's different. Uh, Later that afternoon, as they dug a new drainage trench behind the cabin, she paused to wipe sweat from her brow. This life, she said. It's hard, cold, quiet. Sam looked over, shovel in hand. You don't seem bothered. I think I like the quiet, she answered. And the cold's honest. Doesn't promise anything it won't give. His mouth twitched close to a smile, but not quite. That night, they sat by the fire with tired bodies in full silence. The kind that didn't press or accuse, just lived there, like breath and heartbeat. Work didn't need orders anymore. It just happened like staying. Some folks said your place was cursed, she said, stirring the pot slowly. Said you'd gone strange. Sam didn't deny it. He sat in his chair near the fire, legs stretched out, one hand resting on his knee. His face didn't move, but his eyes flicked toward her, sharp and steady. People say things, he replied. Emma tasted the stew. It was thin, but warm. Like most truths. They said a woman died here, she added. That true? Sam took a long breath. My wife. And our boy. 6 winters back. Fever. She let the silence stretch, not out of awkwardness, but respect. I'm sorry, she said. He nodded once, as if accepting the words but not inviting pity. She understood the difference now. Emma moved to the table, set 2 bowls down, and sat across from him. They ate without ceremony, spoonfuls echoing gently in the quiet. Then she spoke again, softly. My preacher husband said I brought shame into the church, that I was a temptation he had to cast out. Sam's spoon paused mid-air, then continued. He left me at the altar steps, she continued. Told them I was the serpent. Sam didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. I've been told I'm too proud, too loud, too much of something men want, but don't want to own. I don't see that, he said. Emma gave a dry chuckle. You barely know me. I don't have to, he said. She looked at him then, full and direct. If I wanted to stay not just till spring, but longer, would you let me? Sam didn't blink. If you want to, you don't need me permission. But what would that mean? Me staying? He set his bowl down, leaned forward. It'd mean the cabin won't be quiet anymore, and I'd be fine with that. She swallowed hard, emotion thick in her throat. I don't want to stay where I'm not wanted. You're not staying, he said. You're choosing. Emma reached across the table, fingers brushing his rough hand. That night, their distance lessened but trust grew more. Why haven't you asked me to leave? She asked, her voice low, steady. Sam didn't look up from the log he was shaving into kindling. Would it matter if I had? She smiled faintly, but the weight behind her words remained. I just need to know if I'm staying as a guest, or something else. The spring thaw had turned the world soft and damp. Outside, puddles collected beneath the eaves. Inside, the cabin had begun to smell of earth and open windows. Sam set the knife aside and leaned back in his chair. You've been here near 4 months. You cook, work, laugh sometimes. Feels like you're not passing through. But it still doesn't have a name, she said. This thing between us. He didn't flinch, didn't run from the truth like other men had. I don't know what name it needs. Emma nodded slowly. That's fair. But I need to know if I'm just here until your quiet comes back. He stood, walked to the table, and poured her coffee. When he handed it to her, his fingers lingered a second longer than usual. I had a wife, he said. Before the war, before this place. We had a boy, both gone now, like they were never here. Emma sipped carefully, watching him. Do you ever talk about them? Number. Don't change a thing. But this, she gestured between them. This is something, and if I stay, it has to mean more than survival. He looked at her, really looked. You're not someone I took in. You made this house feel alive again. She felt her throat tighten. Her hands warmed around the cup. Then say it, she whispered. Stay. That one word. Clear. Chosen. Enough. And for the first time, she heard the word and believed it. A preacher came to town, the sheriff said, his voice roughened by trail dust and tobacco. He stood at the edge of the porch, one boot resting on the bottom step, hat in hand, looking for his wife. Sam Wainwright leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes steady. He didn't blink at the news, didn't twitch. Behind him, Emma stood still, a mug cooling in her hands. The word preacher sank through her skin like an old wound reopened. Her fingers tightened slightly, but she didn't spill a drop. Didn't catch a name. The sheriff added, but he's dressed like one of those fire and brimstone types. Black coat, Bible under the arm, looking at folks like they owe him something. And to me. Sam glanced back at Emma. Yours? Emma's throat felt like sand. Sounds like him. The sheriff shifted his weight, uncomfortable. He's been sniffing around town, mostly the saloon, asking polite at first. Then not so much. Sam said nothing, just nodded once, slow and unreadable. Emma stepped forward, standing beside him. The sun caught her hair and framed her face with light, but her eyes were clouded. "He say my name?" she asked. "Number. But folks aren't dumb. You showed up midwinter, stayed with Sam, and didn't leave. People put two and two together." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Only this time. Nobody's talking." That made her pause. "No one?" He shook his head. "He's not welcome here. Thinks shouting about sin makes him righteous. But this town's had enough of men like that." Emma almost laughed. It came out more like a breath. "He used to say I made men forget their holiness, that I drew shame like flies to meat." Sam's jaw clenched, but he stayed quiet. The sheriff looked away politely. "I just wanted to warn you. He's not staying at the inn, probably sleeping in his wagon." "Then he'll be gone soon," Sam said. Emma touched the doorframe with her fingertips. It was solid, rough-hewn. It held warmth from the inside, even under her hand. "Let him look," she said. "He lost me long before I ever left." The sheriff gave her a small nod. "You've got folks here, Emma. Might not say it loud, but it's true." He mounted his horse and tipped his hat. Afternoon. They watched him ride back toward town, the trail of dust rising like a second shadow. Sam didn't speak until they'd gone back inside. The air in the cabin was warm, heavy with the smell of beans and onions simmering low. "You all right?" he asked. Emma sat at the table, fingers drumming the rim of the mug. "I thought hearing his name would make me want to run. But I don't feel that. Not this time." Sam sat across from her. "Why not?" She looked at him. "Because there's nowhere I'd rather be than here." He held her gaze. Didn't flinch from it. Didn't try to look through her, like so many others had. Just sat with it. "I ain't gonna let him near you," he said. "I know," she replied. "But you don't have to do anything." He tilted his head. "You sure?" "Yes." She smiled, soft but certain. "Because if he sees me like this strong, clean, unashamed, it'll undo everything he built in his head." They ate dinner with the window cracked open. A robin sang nearby, and the breeze carried the scent of thawed earth. Spring was coming fast now, and with it, new roots. Later that evening, Emma pulled out the small cedar box she'd tucked beneath the bed. Inside were only three things: a folded handkerchief, a pin from her mother, and a gold band, the one she'd worn when she married the preacher. She turned it over in her palm. "You planning to keep that?" Sam asked from the chair, watching her with quiet eyes. "No," she said. "I think I'm planning to give it back." He nodded once. "Need me there?" She shook her head. "I need to do this alone." He didn't argue, just leaned back and stoked the fire. The next morning, Emma walked down to Cotton Ridge alone. Her boots were worn but clean, her shawl freshly stitched. She held her chin up, even when whispers rose from corners. She found him in the square, pacing outside the church like a man who'd lost his compass. The black coat hung off his frame like a borrowed weight. His beard was grayer than she remembered. His eyes still sharp, still cruel, locked on her as she approached. "Emma," he said, voice like polished iron. "Praise be. I prayed you'd be led back to me." She didn't stop walking until they stood face to face. "You didn't pray. You hunted." His smile faltered. "I forgave you." "I didn't ask for forgiveness," she replied. "And I sure didn't ask to be followed. You belong at my side, not in some heathen shack." Emma reached into her pocket and held up the gold band. This meant something once, but not anymore. He reached for it, but she dropped it to the ground before he could touch her. It landed in the dirt between their boots. "That's where it belongs," she said. "With your lies." He stared at her. For the first time, his eyes looked truly lost. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "No," she said. "I regretted staying with you. I'm done doing that." She turned and walked away. No one stopped her. No one called her name. They let her leave like they should have years ago. By the time Emma reached the cabin, the sky had gone golden. Sam was splitting, kindling out back. When he saw her coming up the path, he stopped. She opened the gate, then closed it behind her with a quiet click. The latch fell into place with a sound that felt like punctuation, like the final word in a sentence long overdue. Sam met her near the porch. "You all right?" "I'm free," she said simply. He reached out, not pulling, just offering. She stepped into the space between them and let her forehead rest against his chest. "You came back," he said. "For once," she whispered. "I wasn't knocking." She was home. "You don't need this," Sam said, holding out a small wooden ring carved from pine. "But I'd like you to have it." Emma stared at the ring in his hand. The sunlight hit it just right, catching the soft grain that curled around its surface like a quiet story. No shine, no polish, just time, care, and hands that had spent hours shaping it. "Where'd you get the wood?" she asked softly. "From that old rocking chair," he said. "The leg cracked last fall. Thought it shouldn't go to waste." She smiled. "So you made it into a ring." "Guess I did." They were standing behind the cabin, under the ash tree that had just begun to leaf out. New green pushing against the bark like it had somewhere to be. The breeze was warm, the sky kind. Sam looked nervous. Not the fidgeting kind, but the still, tight-jawed kind. Like a man walking towards something he couldn't undo. Emma didn't reach for the ring yet. Instead, she looked at his face, lined, steady, unsure. She loved that about him, that he didn't pretend to be certain about everything. "You don't strike me as a proposal type," she said. "I'm not," he said quickly. Then, after a beat, "But I wanted to give you something that wasn't just warm food and a roof." Emma glanced back at the house. The curtains fluttered faintly in the open window. Inside, the smell of baking bread still clung to the air. "This life we're making," she said, "it doesn't look like much. No church, no feast, just chores and quiet." "I like quiet," Sam said, "especially when it's with someone who doesn't fill it with noise just to feel heard." She let that sit between them. Then, gently, she took the ring from his hand. It was warm from his palm. She turned it over slowly, feeling the imperfect shape, the tiny groove near one side where the grain had resisted the knife. "Didn't sand this bit all the way," she murmured. "I know," he said. "Left it there on purpose. Nothing's perfect." Emma slipped it onto her finger. It fit not like a store-bought band, but like something that belonged only to her. "You're not asking me to marry you?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not in the way folks expect. No pastor, no paper, no one watching. Just you," she said. "Just me," he echoed. Emma took a step closer, enough that their arms touched. "I don't want to just stay in your bed, Sam. I want to stay in your life." His breath caught a little at that. He looked down at her hand, at the ring now, circling her finger like it had always been meant to. "Then stay," he said simply. That was all. No rehearsed speech, no bending key, no applause. But it felt truer than anything she'd ever heard. They went inside, side by side, walking not like two people who had agreed on a ceremony, but like two who had already built something worth protecting. Emma returned to the kitchen and pulled the bread from the oven. The crust was darker than she liked, but it smelled right. Sam poured coffee into 2 tin cups, setting them down without fuss. When they sat at the table, it wasn't across from each other, like guests. It was beside each other, elbows brushing, movements mirrored. He broke the bread in half, handed her the larger piece. She smiled and said nothing. After the meal, Sam lifted her shawl from the wall peg and hung it again, this time beside his coat, not apart from it. "I think it's time we made another peg," he said. "For what?" she asked, teasing. "For yours and mine. Together." That night, they shared the bed not as strangers weathering a storm, nor as wanderers finding brief shelter, but as people who had decided without permission or proclamation that this was it. Their life didn't need a church bell. The wind outside shifted softly through the budding trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and pine. No vows were spoken aloud. No name was changed. But something permanent had taken root. And in that cabin, with a pinewood ring and a shared silence, Emma Caldwell became not just the woman who stayed, but the woman who belonged. Spring settled over Cotton Ridge like a warm hand, slow and sure. The snow had long melted, leaving the hills brushed in green and the sky a softer shade of blue. Birds nested in the eaves again. Bees returned to the wildflowers behind the fence. Everything that had once been frozen began to bloom. Emma moved differently now, not with urgency or fear, but purpose. She swept the porch before the sun crested the ridge. She baked bread in double batches, humming under her breath. She laughed more. And when she looked at Sam, she didn't glance away. The ring, small, pinewood, worn smooth, stayed on her finger through work and sleep. She never took it off. Sam built her a second peg for her shawl. Then he built shelves for her books, even though she only owned 4. He fixed the leak in the roof. He started leaving his coffee poured for her each morning. One day, as they dug new rows for planting near the cabin, Emma stood up too fast and swayed. Sam dropped his spade. "You all right?" he asked, rushing to her. She touched her forehead, blinking, "Just lightheaded." "You been eating?" She nodded. "I'm fine." But later that evening, after he'd gone to the barn, she took the folded calendar from the drawer and counted the days again. Her fingers shook. 3 weeks late. She sat at the table for a long time, the fire low, the scent of stew forgotten on the stove. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply laid her palm across her belly and let the thought take root. A child. She hadn't imagined this. Not here. Not now. But then again, wasn't everything in this place unexpected? The warmth, the quiet, the man who spoke little but listened well. When Sam returned, boots heavy with dirt, she was still at the table. He paused in the doorway, sensing the stillness. "You sick?" he asked gently. She looked up, eyes calm. I think I'm pregnant." He stood still. No shock. No denial. Just the slow rise and fall of his chest as he let the words settle. After a long pause, he crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. "Are you scared?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "but not like before." He took her hand in both of his. "You want this?" "I want what we have," she answered. "And if that includes this little soul, then yes." He leaned forward and kissed her hand. "Just once. Then we'll make room." They didn't speak much more that night. They didn't need to. He added more wood to the fire. She stirred the stew. Later, when they lay in bed, his hand rested over hers on her belly. The next morning, Sam rode into town alone and returned with a bag of flour, a bolt of cloth, and a tiny knitted cap someone had left on the general store's donation shelf. He didn't explain the items. He didn't have to. Emma sewed curtains for the window near the bed. She started humming lullabies she didn't remember learning. Sam built a cradle from the same wood as the ring. Outside, the garden bloomed in tidy rows. Inside, the house bloomed in quiet expectation. The 13th door had once been just shelter. Now, it was the start of something alive. Not everyone in town understood them. Not everyone approved. But they didn't need everyone. They had each other. And now, they had something more. Something growing, unseen but sure. Like roots. Like rings. Like love. There's something about the way quiet returns after a long storm. Not the silence of absence, but the stillness of belonging. Emma didn't plan to find a home. Sam didn't ask for company. Yet somehow, in the soft hush of snow and the simple rituals of firewood and bread, they stitched together a life where healing wasn't spoken, but lived. The cabin didn't just warm their hands that winter, it warmed the parts of them both. They thought, long buried. At its heart, this story isn't about romance or even survival. It's about what happens when someone stops shutting the door. When one act of quiet kindness becomes a turning point, not just for the moment, but for the soul. In a world that often rushes past, there's power in slowing down, in choosing someone not because they're perfect, but because they stayed. Maybe that's the most ordinary kind of miracle we overlook. Not rescue, but recognition. And perhaps, in our own lives, we've met that 13th door a final chance when we had little left. Or maybe we've been that door for someone else, offering warmth when they had nowhere to knock. Let that reminder stay with us. Sometimes, the greatest acts of love come, not with fanfare, but with a blanket, a bowl of stew, and a wordless welcome. Take a moment to reflect on what you've just heard. Let the quiet linger. And if this story stirred something in you, a memory, a hope, or a breath of gratitude, consider sharing that warmth. Somewhere, someone is still walking through snow, looking for a door that opens. And when they find it, maybe it will be yours.